The porch light buzzed overhead when my son, my only child, looked me in the eye and said, "You're not family anymore." Still, as I stood there holding the casserole I made for his grief, I didn't speak, I just memorized the way he locked the door. While the bulb flickered against the cold glass, I slid the envelope through their mail slot without a word. The same porch where I once rocked him to sleep would now be the stage for his undoing. That's when I knew he'd never read the trust his father and I signed together. He erased his mother by choice, so I erased him by law. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The quiet in Marilyn Foster's kitchen that evening felt heavier than grief alone. Thick, unmoving, as if the house itself had absorbed the weight of the days leading up to her husband's funeral. She stood at the counter, smoothing the foil over a casserole she prepared out of habit more than hunger. Chicken, wild rice, a hint of white wine in the sauce. Her husband used to say the dish tasted like home, and for nearly 5 decades, feeding her family had been the most natural expression of love she knew. She tucked the warm pan into an insulated carrier and slipped into her coat. The drive across town felt strangely suspended, streetlights stretching across the windshield in long, blurred strokes. She told herself she wasn't imposing. Andrew and Chloe were grieving too. Distance, she believed, was simply another form of exhaustion. At their house, dusk had dimmed the yard into soft silhouettes. The porch light glowed, steady and welcoming, at least from a distance. She knocked gently, then again when she heard movement inside. The door cracked open. Chloe's face appeared first, framed in the gap, wearing a polite smile that didn't touch the coolness in her eyes. "Oh, Marilyn," she said, "we weren't expecting you." "I brought dinner," Marilyn replied, lifting the bag slightly, offering it like an olive branch. "That's kind," Chloe answered, stepping forward but not widening the door. "But we're doing dinner on our own tonight, just keeping things simple." The words were neat, practiced, almost rehearsed. Marilyn nodded, though a small hollow formed beneath her ribs. Andrew appeared behind his wife, shoulders tense, eyes dulled from too many sleepless nights. For a fleeting second, there was the boy she once knew, the one who used to wave at her from the field after baseball practice, but it faded as quickly as it surfaced. "Mom," he said quietly, gesturing toward the front walkway, "can we talk for a second?" Chloe slipped back inside without waiting. Cold air wrapped around them as Andrew stepped outside. His breath came out in faint white puffs that drifted between them. "We need to set some boundaries," he began, voice level, almost detached. Marilyn held the casserole closer, the warmth seeping into her arms. Boundaries? The word didn't fit the space between them, not after everything they had weathered as a family. He didn't soften. "You're not really part of the core family anymore. You have your own space now, we have ours." No tremor in his tone, no hesitation. Just a simple division, spoken as if he were reorganizing numbers on a spreadsheet rather than severing a bond that had shaped both their lives. Marilyn absorbed the sentence quietly. 48 years of marriage, years of double shifts, decades of building a life brick by brick, the foundation she and her husband created now being treated as optional, removable. She didn't argue, she didn't cry, she simply steadied her breath. "Thank you for being honest," she said. Relief flickered across Andrew's expression, a small exhale that seemed to confirm he'd completed something unpleasant but necessary. She walked back to her car with the casserole still warm in her hands, warm, useful, but unwanted. The drive home passed in muted motion. When she stepped into her condo, the silence felt different than it had that morning. It wasn't grief now, it was certainty. She set the casserole on the counter, peeled back the foil, and watched steam drift upward into the empty room. Then she crossed to the hallway closet, bent down, and pulled out a small locked drawer hidden beneath an old quilt. Inside lay a thin blue folder. "Joint assets." Her fingertips brushed the spine as she lifted it, a slow breath catching at the end like something inside her shifting into place. When she opened it, a single page slid free, bearing her husband's signature in clean, decisive strokes. A signature that suggested he had known this moment might come, and that he had left her far more prepared than Andrew ever realized. The morning after Andrew's words carved themselves into her memory, Marilyn found an envelope tucked between grocery coupons and a water bill. The handwriting stopped her, childish. Hopeful, unmistakably Emma's. She carried it to the kitchen table and opened it with the care of someone unfolding a fragile truth. Inside was a drawing of the lake house porch, 2 chairs, 2 mugs, and a soft purple message floating above them, "I miss our tea time." The picture settled something in her and unsettled something else. While the adults tightened boundaries and excuses, the child reached out in the only way she could. Before she could pin the drawing to the refrigerator, her phone chimed. A notification flashed across the screen: "You no longer have access to the foster family calendar." And then another, this one from Chloe. "Let's streamline communication. This is easier for everyone." Marilyn stared at the message, feeling its cold efficiency. Streamlining was Chloe's specialty, whether it was reorganizing the pantry or slowly erasing the parts of Andrew's life that didn't fit her curated image. A second alert arrived. This one from Andrew was even shorter. "Mom, let's skip this month's check-in. We're just overloaded right now. No warmth, no softness, no sign of the boy who once begged her to sit through extra innings just so he could look up and find her in the crowd. The blue folder she had pulled out the night before still sat on the counter. Its presence felt heavier now, not as a memory but as a reminder. She laid a hand on it, inhaled once, and reached for her keys. Rita's office sat in a converted Victorian house at the edge of town, its stained glass windows catching thin winter sunlight. The air inside smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. Rita greeted her with the kind of perceptive nod that suggested she already understood why Marilyn had come. They settled into armchairs across from each other. Marilyn explained what happened on the porch, how Andrew's voice remained steady while hers had nearly given way. She didn't embellish, she trusted Rita to hear what went unspoken. When she finished, Rita opened a thick binder and pressed her fingertips to several colored tabs. "Your name," she said, "is still on the lake house deed, the pension, and every estate file your husband prepared before he passed." A quiet steadiness moved through Marilyn, not satisfaction, just clarity. Her husband had seen something she hadn't wanted to acknowledge, and he'd prepared for it. Rita closed the binder gently. "We should update your medical directive. You mentioned wanting changes." "Yes," Marilyn said, "it's time." She didn't hesitate, she didn't waver. Andrew's name no longer belonged in that space. Rita drew out a new form and handed over a pen. As Marilyn signed, the line of her signature remained firm, each letter closing a door that had already begun to swing shut. When the final stroke dried on the page, Rita aligned the documents with practiced precision. "Once this is filed, everything you've built will be secure." Outside, branches tapped the window in steady, wind-driven rhythm. Marilyn glanced toward the sound, feeling an odd prickle at the back of her neck, as though the world had shifted its balance just slightly, waiting to see what she would do next. Rita watched her carefully. "Is something on your mind?" Marilyn's gaze settled on the folder lying between them, its edges neat, its contents decisive. "What happens," she asked quietly, "when the people shutting you out don't realize the power they walked away from?" The question hung in the room, sharp, heavy, and carrying the promise of a turning tide. The next Saturday, with frost still clinging to the edges of the windshield, Marilyn drove to the lake house. The road curved through tall pines that held the cold morning light in their branches, the same route she and her husband used to take for weekend escapes. Now the drive felt different, quieter, deliberate, as though she were approaching a truth she had avoided acknowledging too long. When she unlocked the front door, stale air drifted out to greet her. She walked through the room slowly, fingertips gliding along familiar surfaces, dust motes rising in her wake. She pushed every window open, one by one, letting winter air sweep through the spaces that had once held summer laughter. The curtains lifted like tired lungs remembering how to breathe. She took out her phone and began documenting the valuables. Her late husband's watch collection, the antique desk they restored together, the hand-carved mantel clock Andrew loved as a child. Each photo felt like a quiet act of reclaiming, proof of presence, proof of contribution, proof she had never stepped away from what she helped build. In the downstairs den, she opened a drawer to check on an inventory list she kept years ago. Instead of her handwriting, she found a glossy printout. A real estate flyer. The front of the house stared back at her in perfect lighting, trees trimmed, porch swept. Above it, in bold lettering, exclusive lakefront listing, prime opportunity. Below that, a local agent's name she recognized, someone Chloe once hired for a home renovation consultation. The realization landed with a sharp, precise weight. They had moved forward without telling her, without even asking. Chloe had taken steps as if the property were already hers to barter. Her phone rang. Andrew. She considered letting it ring out but answered, not trusting silence to shield her anymore. We've been thinking, Andrew began, his tone clipped as if this were a business call rather than a conversation with the woman who raised him. With everything going on, it might be time to consolidate assets, probably time to sell the lake house. She looked at the open windows, the curtains trembling in the cold air. You can't list what you don't own, she said. He gave a quick laugh, surprised, dismissive. You haven't lived there in years, Mom. The casual confidence in his voice struck her more deeply than the words themselves. He believed the distance he created had rewritten the facts. She stepped toward the kitchen counter where the real estate flyer lay like a quiet confession. Andrew, she said evenly, the deed says otherwise. A beat of silence followed, confusion, irritation, something unspoken shifting in the quiet. I don't follow, he said. But she wasn't interested in explanations. After the call ended, Marilyn walked through the house again, slower this time, grounding herself in every memory the walls held, her husband fixing a loose banister, Emma chasing fireflies across the yard, Andrew learning to bait a fishing line. The history here was layered and real, not something to be swept aside for convenience. When she returned home, she pulled out the blue folder from her desk drawer. The joint ownership deed rested inside, neat and unaltered. She scanned the document carefully, each signature sharp, each date unmistakable. Within minutes, she sent the file to Andrew with a short, unmistakable message. No emotion, no explanation, just the document that proved the lake house still belonged, legally and undeniably, to her. She hovered the cursor before hitting send, knowing the moment he opened it, the ground beneath his plans would shift. And somewhere deep in her chest, a new steadiness began to take shape. Because now, the question wasn't whether he would challenge her. It was how far he and Chloe would go once they realized the house they wanted wasn't theirs to claim. 2 days after Marilyn sent the deed to Andrew, Rita called with a voice that carried equal parts caution and confirmation. She didn't waste time with preamble. The bank flagged a request from Chloe, she said. She tried accessing the investment account tied to the lake house. They reported it as suspicious. The words didn't shock Marilyn, not after the real estate flyer, not after the dismissive laughter on the phone, but they tightened something behind her ribs. Chloe had crossed from manipulation into maneuvering. Denied immediately, Rita added. Nothing was touched. Marilyn exhaled, slow and steady. There was still a foundation beneath her feet, even if Andrew and Chloe were trying to chip away at it. Later that morning, she met Rita at a small coffee shop tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. The place smelled of roasted beans and warm pastries, sunlight slipping through tall windows and pooling across their table. Rita spread several folders beside her cup, the edges squared, the tabs color-coded as always. We need to get ahead of whatever they're planning, Rita said, sliding a draft toward her. You still have full authority to amend the estate. Marilyn studied the document. The language was crisp, the tone unyielding. It introduced a clause that reflected what Andrew had already made clear on his porch. If respect is withdrawn publicly and without cause, inheritance may be withdrawn in equal measure. It wasn't revenge, it was definition. Rita watched her closely. You don't have to sign today, but you should think about how their choices have changed yours. Marilyn nodded. The lake house windows, the real estate flyer, Chloe's clipped messages, every moment formed a constellation she could no longer ignore. That afternoon, back in her condo, she opened a fresh notebook. The first page felt unmarked in the same way her resolve once had. She began writing simple dates, short descriptions, nothing emotional, nothing exaggerated, times she'd been excluded, comments that dismissed her, calls canceled without explanation. Each entry was factual, steady, quietly damning. She wasn't building a case out of spite. She was documenting a pattern that had already cost her pieces of her family. When the final line of the day was written, she set the notebook aside and pulled out a small box of stationery. Soft ivory paper, embossed edges. She used to save it for holidays. Now she used it to write letters for a girl who deserved better than the coldness surrounding her. One letter for each of Emma's future birthdays. She wrote about what Emma loved at 10, the color lave. Ender, the old swing at the lake house, the way she hummed when she was concentrating. Each letter held encouragement, small wisdoms, and reminders that kindness wasn't a phase but a foundation. She sealed each envelope, dated it carefully, and placed them in a stack that seemed to grow heavier with intent. By early evening, her phone buzzed again. A notification from social media, Chloe's latest post. A pastel graphic with curated lettering read, "Emotional labor is real. Know when to set boundaries with aging parents." The caption continued with a polished paragraph about generational entitlement and the bravery required to protect one's inner circle. Hundreds of likes appeared beneath it, people reacting without knowing the truth behind the performance. Marilyn didn't comment, she didn't message Andrew, she simply watched the way public perception could be shaped by someone determined to rewrite a narrative. Outside, the sky shifted from pale blue to a muted violet. Light pooled on the floor in long rectangles, stretching farther as the sun dipped behind the hills. She closed her laptop, but a lingering worry threaded through her. If Chloe was willing to present herself as the wounded party before anything had happened publicly, then whatever came next wasn't going to be subtle. And as Marilyn turned off the kitchen light, a single question rose with the shadows. How long before Chloe stopped playing at boundaries and started breaking them? The next morning, before the frost on her porch rail had finished melting, Marilyn drove to Rita's office with the notebook of documented incidents tucked neatly in her bag. The Victorian house looked sharper in the early light, its stained glass panes glowing in muted colors. Rita was already waiting inside, jacket draped over her chair, a stack of legal files arranged with her usual precision. She glanced up as Marilyn entered. "I reviewed your notes," she said quietly. "You've been patient longer than most. It's time we use the protections your husband left in place." Marilyn took a seat, fingers laced to keep them steady. "I want whatever's left to go where it will matter." Rita opened a slim folder marked Trust Options and turned to a page she had bookmarked. "Your husband anticipated the possibility of conflict. He created a provision that allows for a generational bypass if activated jointly by the surviving spouse and counsel." She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "It allows assets to skip Andrew entirely and pass directly to the next generation." Emma. The name alone softened Marilyn's expression. She nodded, the motion small but decisive. Rita continued, "We can place your share of the lake house into a restricted trust. Emma will gain full rights at 25. Until then, everything remains under your control." Marilyn felt something loosen inside her, a knot that had been tightening since the night Andrew spoke to her on the porch. "Include a condition," she said. "If they challenge anything in court, she forfeits the inheritance." Rita didn't flinch, understood. She drafted the language with clean, deliberate strokes, each word a boundary that could not be erased by entitlement or temper. By early afternoon, the documents were signed. The trust was active. The lake house, the place where generations of memories lived, was secured for someone who had never treated it as an asset but as a sanctuary. The news reached Chloe faster than Marilyn expected. Late that evening, Marilyn's phone lit with a string of furious messages, none from Andrew, all from Chloe, demands, accusations, screenshots of legal terms she didn't seem to fully grasp. Marilyn read them once, then set the phone aside. The next call came from Andrew. He didn't shout, he didn't insult. His silence before speaking carried something worse, panic wrapped in pride. "Mom," he said finally, "we need to meet, there's a misunderstanding." "There isn't," she answered softly. "You were clear, I'm not family." A breath caught on the line, followed by a brittle pause. He didn't argue, he simply ended the call without offering a time or place. Night settled across her condo, the quiet deeper than usual. She sat at the kitchen table, the trust documents neatly stacked beside her, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. Her phone vibrated again, but this time the sender made her smile. "Emma, can I visit you for my birthday?" Marilyn's reply came instantly. "Always." She held the phone to her chest for a moment, letting the warmth of the message seep into her, gentle and anchoring. Amid the tension, there was still a thread of love that hadn't frayed. But as she leaned back in her chair, something flickered on her lock screen, a bank alert she hadn't expected, a notification that shouldn't have appeared at all. Someone had attempted another access. This time not from Chloe. The challenge she warned them against might already be in motion. And the consequences, now written int. Ola, would fall harder than any of them understood. The will reading was scheduled for a gray Thursday morning, the sky low enough to feel almost touchable. Andrew treated it like a formality, responding to Rita's official notice with a curt "received," as if the meeting were nothing more than a procedural box to check. He didn't know what had shifted beneath him, what documents had already rearranged the future he believed he controlled. Marilyn arrived 20 minutes early. She stood outside the converted Victorian law office, smoothing the soft wool of the coat she had chosen deliberately. It was the color her husband always favored on her, a deep, understated green that reminded him of the pine ridges around the lake house. Wearing it felt like walking in with quiet reinforcement at her back. Inside, the conference room was still empty. Fresh coffee steamed on a side tray and the long oak table gleamed under the overhead lights. She settled into a chair near the window where the glass reflected her calm expression back at her. She had expected nerves, maybe anger. Instead, she felt a steadiness she hadn't known in years. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Chloe appeared first, heels striking the wood floor like she was entering a stage. Her eyes skimmed the room until they landed on Marilyn. The sneer came quickly, sharp and unfiltered. "Didn't realize you'd be here," she said. Marilyn didn't shift, didn't break eye contact. "I never left." The reply folded the air between them into a silence Chloe didn't know how to fill. She looked away, jaw tight. Andrew followed a moment later. His collar was uneven, his expression restless as though he had slept in fragments. He squeezed his hands together when he saw his mother, but he didn't speak. Uncertainty showed in the way he hovered near the doorway instead of taking a seat beside his wife. Behind him, almost hidden, Emma slipped into the room. She spotted Marilyn instantly, her shoulders dropping with visible relief. She crossed the space quietly and slid into the chair beside her grandmother. Their hands found each other without effort, small fingers curling into a familiar embrace. Andrew noticed this too, his gaze flickering, conflicted. Rita entered last, carrying a thick file secured with 2 brass clips. She greeted Marilyn with a warmth that needed no explanation, then glanced at the others with a neutral professionalism that revealed nothing but readiness. "Thank you all for being on time," she said. "We'll get started shortly." Chloe sat rigidly, one hand clutching her designer bag, the other tapping against her knee. Andrew scanned the folders on the table, as if searching for an indication of what might be inside. Neither of them saw the way Rita's glance passed briefly to Marilyn, a silent confirmation that the foundation of the meeting had already shifted. Rita set the file down and closed the conference room door with a quiet, definitive click. Then she reached for the lock, a smooth turn, a small mechanical sound, but enough to make Chloe stiffen and Andrew straighten in his chair. Emma tightened her grip on Marilyn's hand. Rita moved to the head of the table, opened the file, and lifted the first document. Her voice carried a calm authority as she looked from one face to the next. "Let's begin." The words fell into the room like a gavel striking wood. Andrew leaned forward, unaware that the ground he believed he stood on was already gone. Chloe's confidence thinned visibly, her posture shrinking ever so slightly as she watched Rita unfold page after page. And Marilyn, still in her husband's favorite color, still steady, felt the smallest tremor of anticipation. Because Rita hadn't yet revealed the updated clauses, the trust transfers, or the bypass already signed into effect. But she would. And when she did, nothing in this family would remain untouched. The rustle of paper was the only sound in the room as Rita lifted the first page of the will. The document looked unassuming: cream paper, clean typeface, crisp edges, but the tension it carried shifted the air like a storm rolling in behind closed windows. Marilyn sat still, hands folded loosely in her lap, Emma's small fingers wrapped around her other hand. Across the table, Andrew leaned forward, elbows braced, as if proximity alone could guarantee the outcome he expected. Chloe positioned herself at an angle, chin high, feigning a composure she no longer felt. Rita began. "This is the final legally executed estate plan of the late Thomas Foster. All updates were reviewed, witnessed, and notarized in accordance with state law." Andrew's shoulders dropped slightly, relief beginning to form. Too early, too fragile. Rita turned the page. "In accordance with these documents," she continued, "Marilyn Foster remains primary controller of all assets for the remainder of her lifetime." Andrew's relief evaporated, his mouth parted but no words followed. Chloe's fingers stilled against her bag straw. Rita didn't pause. "Furthermore, the position of executor is reassigned. Andrew Foster is not to serve in any administrative or fiduciary capacity." Andrew blinked hard as if the words were blurring. Why?" he asked, but Rita held up a hand gently. "There will be time for questions at the end." Chloe exhaled sharply through her nose, though she managed to keep her expression mostly neutral until Rita lifted the next sheet. "This section concerns property eligibility, due to documented patterns of persistent disregard toward both the decedent and his surviving spouse." Chloe straightened abruptly. "Chloe Foster is barred from holding, co-managing, or benefiting from any real estate connected to the Foster estate." Color drained from Chloe's face, her mouth tightened into a thin, trembling line. "That's absurd," she snapped, voice cracking despite her attempt at control. This has to be a mistake." Rita met her eyes calmly. "The language is clear and binding." A slow stillness settled across the table, the kind that comes before glass breaks. Emma's grip on Marilyn's hand tightened again. Rita continued flipping through the file until she reached a page marked with a gold tab. She slid it onto the table so the print faced the family. "And here," she said gently, "is the designation regarding the lake house." Marilyn watched Andrew's eyes dart to the bold section title. Emma leaned closer, reading silently. "The lake house," Rita read aloud, "is placed into a protected trust, with full ownership passing to Emma Foster at age 25. Emma inhaled sharply, soft, startled, unsure. Andrew's breath faltered entirely, his gaze dropped to the table as if the weight of the words forced it down. Chloe's nails bit into her palm, knuckles whitening as she swallowed her outrage. Rita's tone remained steady. "This decision was drafted, signed, and secured 14 months ago, long before recent events, long before any conflicts arose." Andrew's head snapped up. 14 months, his voice was thin, unfixed. "Dad did this without telling me." Rita nodded softly. He understood what he wanted his legacy to protect. Chloe looked between them, panic slipping through her expression now that the performance couldn't hold. "But we're the immediate family," she said, voice trembling. "This doesn't make any sense, it's irrational, it's binding," Rita replied. A silence fell that felt heavier than any spoken argument. Andrew sat frozen, staring at the page as if reading it differently might change the outcome. Chloe blinked rapidly, eyes glossed, fury simmering beneath shock. Marilyn watched them both, not with triumph but with a steady sadness, a recognition of choices made long before this room. Emma's head gently rested against her grandmother's shoulder. And then Rita turned another page, sliding a separate document forward, its header marked Supplemental Provisions, a section no one but Marilyn knew existed. "We're not finished," she said. Andrew's eyes widened. Chloe's breath hitched. Marilyn lifted her chin. The next revelation, the one positioned to hit hardest, waited beneath Rita's fingertips. For several long seconds, no one moved. The supplemental provisions remained under Rita's hand like a loaded verdict waiting for release. When she finally lifted the page, Andrew reacted first, leaning in, scanning the columns of legal text as though sheer force of concentration could bend its meaning. By the time she finished reading, the room had shifted again. Andrew pushed back from the table abruptly. "I want copies," he said, voice strained but attempting authority. "All of it, every page." Rita nodded, unsurprised. "They'll be emailed to you by the end of day and a printed packet will be available for pickup. Nothing here is withheld." Her tone was measured, respectful but immovable. "And everything," she added, "is fully enforceable." Chloe's agitation surged. "We'll take this to court," she snapped. "You can't just exclude people like this. There are rights, there are laws, we're not standing for it." Rita closed the folder calmly. "You're welcome to pursue litigation, but be advised, any legal challenge from either of you activates the forfeiture clause." The words hit like a cold wave. Chloe stopped mid-breath. Andrew stared at Rita. "Clause? It's been in place for over a year," Rita replied. "Your father insisted on it. If the will is contested, the challenger removes themselves from eligibility permanently." A tremor of disbelief rippled across his face. Chloe looked as though she'd been slapped. Emma, still leaning gently against Marilyn, watched the exchange quietly, absorbing more than a 10-year-old should have to. Marilyn didn't gloat, she didn't smirk. She simply sat with the same steady expression she'd carried into the room. When Chloe finally rounded on her, searching for a reaction, Marilyn met her gaze calmly. "This isn't revenge," she said, "it's clarity. The simplicity of." The statement unsettled Chloe more than anything else that morning. The meeting dissolved soon after. Andrew signed for receipt of the documents with a rigid hand. Chloe stormed out without looking back. Emma hugged her grandmother tightly before leaving with them, whispering something that made Marilyn's chest ache with a familiar warmth. Later that evening, a text arrived from Emma. "Can I stay with you this weekend?" A second message followed a moment later. "I just want somewhere quiet." Marilyn replied without hesitation. "Of course, sweetheart, pack whatever you want." When Emma arrived the next afternoon, the strain from the meeting still clung to her small shoulders. Marilyn distracted her with a baking project, lavender cookies, Emma's favorite, then set out canvases in the living room. They painted for hours, the brushes leaving streaks of color across paper and easing the tension that had settled between the two worlds Emma now straddled. Laughter replaced the silence neither of them had wanted to acknowledge. By evening, the condo felt alive again, warm, fragrant, hopeful in a way the larger family had forgotten how to be. But the quiet didn't last. Just after dusk, footsteps sounded on the porch. A firm knock followed. Marilyn walked to the window and saw Andrew's car, engine still running, headlights cutting across her walkway. His figure hovered on the doorstep, shoulders rigid, expression unreadable. She didn't open the door. She didn't move. She simply stepped back into the shadows until the knocking stopped. After several minutes, his silhouette retreated. The car pulled away. Emma from the hallway asked softly, "Was that my dad?" Marilyn wiped her hands on a towel and answered gently, "Not tonight, sweetheart." By morning, the digital ripples had begun. Chloe's social media accounts, once full of curated brunch plates and posed family photos, shifted into something darker. Posts hinting at betrayal, cryptic statements about elder manipulation, comments designed to reshape the narrative in her favor. But the audience didn't take the bait. The reactions were thin. Some followers questioned her tone, others simply unfollowed. Her strategy, so often effective, faltered without the illusion of moral high ground. Marilyn noticed the decline only because Rita sent screenshots with a short note. "She's losing the room." Yet even as Chloe's attempts collapsed, a new tension settled in the air, something unspoken, something waiting. Because Andrew had knocked once, and Marilyn sensed he wasn't finished. The next time he showed up, it might not be the door he came for. It might be the trust, the house, or the granddaughter slipping slowly out of his reach. 2 days after Andrew's unannounced visit, Marilyn returned to Rita's office. The tension from the will reading still clung to her like a thin film, but beneath it lived a steadier force, resolve, sharpened by clarity. Rita ushered her inside without ceremony and closed the door behind them. "I've been reviewing additional files," she said. Her tone was deliberate, almost careful. "Ones your husband asked me to keep sealed unless circumstances warranted opening them." She walked to a tall cabinet, retrieved a slim burgundy folder bound with an archival ribbon and placed it on the table between them. The seal crackled faintly as she untied it. Inside lay documents Marilyn didn't recognize, papers her husband had prepared privately, long before his health began to fade, long before Andrew's distance widened into something irrevocable. Rita spread the pages neatly. "This," she explained, "is a secondary trust he created in your name alone." Marilyn's breath caught. Beneath the header were line items, structured, substantial, untouched. A pension transfer he'd never mentioned. A conservative investment portfolio, carefully tended. An emergency fund large enough to steady any future storm. "All of this," Rita said, tapping the top page gently, "was reserved for you and Emma eventually. No one else has claim." Marilyn took in the neat signatures, each stroke familiar, steady, even during the months when illness had made everything harder. He had planned this when he still walked the lake house stairs without holding the rail. He had prepared for the possibility of conflict long before she saw it coming. "Your husband planned for silence," Rita said, "protection without confrontation." The words landed with a heaviness that was not pain but recognition. Thomas had known who in his family could be trusted to honor his wishes and who could not. The next day, everything strained further. Chloe appeared at the law office without an appointment, her expression tight, her steps sharp. She marched to Rita's desk, demanding an explanation for the sealed trust and insisting she had been overlooked in error. Her voice carried through the hallway, clipped and brittle. "There must be a provision for spouses of heirs," she insisted. "You can't exclude me entirely." Ida listened calmly, then retrieved a single sheet from the burgundy folder, a clause handwritten in Thomas's steady script, then typed and notarized. "No beneficiary," Rita read aloud, "who disrespects or demonstrates harmful conduct toward the surviving spouse shall receive assent." The air left Chloe's chest in a ragged sound. That can't be legal." "It is," Rita answered, "and enforceable." Every witness verified his intent. Chloe's face hardened, fury glazing her expression. She looked past Rita, toward Marilyn, who had arrived moments earlier and now stood near the doorway. Their eyes met, one filled with indignation, the other with a quiet truth that no longer needed defending. Marilyn's voice was soft, but it carried. "He knew who you were," she said, "even if I pretended not to." The statement didn't rise in volume, it didn't shake, but it cut directly through the tension, each word landing with the precision of years distilled into one sentence. Chloe recoiled as though struck. She opened her mouth, searching for a retort that wouldn't come. Andrew, who had been lingering outside the doorway, stepped inside, then, drawn by the sound, by the conflict, by an unraveling he was no longer able to control. His expression flickered between anger and doubt, guilt and calculation. For the first time, he seemed unsure which side of his own marriage he was standing on. Rita closed the burgundy folder with a quiet snap. "We still have more to review," she said. "This is only the beginning." Andrew turned to Marilyn, something unspoken forming behind his eyes, realization perhaps, or the beginning of regret. But before he could speak, Rita placed another sealed envelope on the table, this one addressed to Marilyn in her husband's handwriting. A deeper truth was still waiting. And whatever it contained had the power to reshape everything that came next. The sealed envelope lay untouched on Marilyn's kitchen table the following morning, her husband's handwriting looping across the front with a steadiness that made her chest tighten. She hadn't opened it yet, not because she feared what it contained, but because she understood its significance. Whatever truth waited inside deserved a clear head. Before she could reach for it, her phone buzzed with a message from Rita. "We need to talk," something was sent to the firm. Marilyn's pulse quickened, not with fear but with recognition. Chloe had been rattled, cornered. Desperation was the next predictable step. By the time Marilyn arrived at the office, Rita already had the message pulled up on her monitor. She didn't ease into it. "She attempted to claim you're mentally unfit," Rita said, motioning her closer. "She sent this to 3 partners and hinted she'd regrettably need the court to intervene." The email glowed on the screen, polished, performative, carefully worded to appear concerned rather than vindictive. Chloe's tone dripped with false sympathy, citing erratic decisions, possible cognitive decline, and a troubling lack of transparency from Marilyn. Marilyn closed her eyes briefly. There it was, the line Chloe had finally crossed. Rita clicked to the next window. This, she said, is how we're responding. A series of scanned documents filled the screen, cognitive evaluations dated within the last month. Physicians' signatures, notary stamps, each page confirming Marilyn's sharpness, reasoning, memory capacity. She tried to undermine you, Rita continued, but Thomas planned even for this. He asked that annual evaluations be kept on file, in case someone attempted to question your competence. Marilyn stared at the familiar handwriting on one of the physician's notes. Her husband's foresight reached places she had not even imagined. "I'll sit for whatever they need," she said softly. "You already have," Rita reminded her, "but to close this out formally, I need you for a short recorded deposition." The deposition was scheduled for that afternoon. The camera lens reflected her calm face as the legal assistant asked a series of direct, procedural questions: estate understanding, financial awareness, decision-making capacity. Marilyn answered with poised clarity, her voice steady, her posture unwavering. Not once did she stumble. Rita watched from behind the monitor, her expression a blend of pride and simmering frustration at the lengths Chloe was willing to go. When the session ended, Marilyn stepped outside into the late winter air, feeling a strange combination of exhaustion and steadiness. Her phone buzzed again. "Andrew, we need to talk before this gets worse." She read it twice, then typed her reply slowly, deliberately. "You made it worse the day you closed the door." She hit send before doubt could soften the truth. That evening, Emma arrived at Marilyn's condo with paint on her sleeve and a rolled sheet of paper clutched in her hand. She didn't mention the tense drive over or the argument she'd overheard between her parents. Instead, she stepped inside and unrolled the paper on the kitchen counter. It was a drawing of Marilyn sitting on the lake house porch, the water behind her turning gold under a setting sun. Emma had written a small line at the bottom. "You're the only one who listens." The sentiment hit Marilyn harder than any legal battle. She gathered the girl into her arms, holding her tightly, brushing her hair back as Emma's breathing steadied. Later, after Emma fell asleep on the couch, Marilyn finally returned to the sealed envelope left on the table. Her husband's handwriting seemed to meet her eyes with quiet insistence. She slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a single sheet. Not legal instructions. Not financial debt. Ailes. A message. And as she unfolded it, the few lines of ink drew the breath from her lungs, because what he had written didn't just explain the past. It warned her about what was still coming. The morning after she read her husband's warning, Marilyn moved through her condo with a quiet deliberateness. Something in the letter had shifted the air around her. It hadn't frightened her, but it had clarified what still lay ahead. She folded the page carefully and placed it inside the blue folder with the others, one truth returning home to sit beside another. By late afternoon, Emma had returned to Andrew and Chloe's house. The condo felt emptier for it, the silence returning with long, slow breaths. Marilyn stood at the sink rinsing paintbrushes from their earlier art project when movement outside caught her eye. A familiar sedan pulled into the driveway. Andrew stepped out. He hesitated before closing the car door, holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers, half-wilted, petals bruised at the edges as if caught between indecision and obligation. He walked to the porch with a stiffness that betrayed nerves he didn't want to admit. He stared at the front door for several seconds before knocking 3 short taps, a pause, then one more. Marilyn didn't move. She watched from the kitchen doorway, hidden by the angle of the house. The flowers looked like an afterthought, something grabbed because doing nothing seemed worse than doing something poorly. His shoulders rose and fell, breath visible in the cool air. For a fleeting moment, he looked less like the man who had declared she wasn't part of the core family, and more like the son she once guided through scraped knees and awkward apologies. But the door remained closed. She wasn't ready, not for a conversation held only because his plans had begun to crumble, not because Chloe's schemes had backfired, not because he finally sensed the ground shifting beneath him. He knocked again, lighter this time, almost hopeful. Still, she stayed where she was. After a minute, he set the bouquet on the porch railing. No card, no explanation, no words offered for the years of distance or the cruelty spoken so easily on that winter porch. He lingered a moment longer, then returned to his car. The engine started, the vehicle backed down the drive, leaving the flowers nodding weakly in the cold. Marilyn exhaled, a slow release of a feeling she once mislabeled as grief but now recognized as acceptance. She stepped outside only when the taillights disappeared, retrieving the bouquet without ceremony. The flowers trembled in her hands, shedding a few loose petals as she brought them inside. She set them on the counter, then opened the drawer where she kept an old leather journal. A ribbon marked a page written months earlier, during nights when hope still softened the ache. Maybe one day he'll come around. She read the line twice, then tore the page free. The rip was soft but final. She carried the paper to the fireplace, struck a match, and dropped the fragment onto the grate. Flames curled around the ink, dissolving the sentence into ash. Letting go, she realized, was not always loud. Sometimes it was a whisper disappearing into smoke. Later that week, Rita called with confirmation. "The trust reallocation is complete," she said. "No challenges, all protections remain exactly as filed." There was reassurance in her tone, quiet but solid. Marilyn thanked her, then drove to the office the following morning to finalize one more decision. Her will. In Rita's private conference room, Marilyn reviewed the document line by line. The language was clean, firm, unmistakable. She initialed the margins, signed the final page, and watched Rita notarize the file with a stamp that echoed softly across the table. "Executor remains unchanged," Rita said, "and Emma is now the primary heir to all personal and residual assets." Marilyn nodded. The decisions no longer felt heavy, they felt correct. They felt like a map drawn with clarity instead of guilt. When she returned home that afternoon, the condo was filled with late-day light, warm, stretching gently across the floorboards. She placed the new documents in her safe, locking them beside the envelope from her husband. But just as she stepped back, her phone buzzed. A voicemail. From Chloe. The preview text displayed only the first few words. "She's going to rot alone." Marilyn stared at the screen, a slow chill weaving through her chest. She pressed play. And the voice that spilled into the room, raw, unfiltered, unaware it was being recorded, shattered any illusion that the storm had passed. Whatever peace had settled between these walls was about to be tested in ways she had never anticipated. The voicemail played through Marilyn's living room like a storm that had slipped through the walls. Chloe's voice, usually polished for public consumption, came through raw, jagged, and unrestrained. "She's going to rot alone in that dusty condo," she spat, the words landing with venom Chloe would never dare say face to face. "She thinks she's so clever. That old woman doesn't get to decide everything. Andrew will see that he'll have to. We won't let her win." There was a sharp sound in the background, maybe a cupboard slammed, maybe a heel snapped against tile. The rant spiraled on, Chloe unaware she hadn't ended the call. 42 seconds of anger, resentment, and a desperation that bled through every syllable. Marilyn didn't flinch. She listened once, saved the file, and forwarded it directly to Rita with a short message. "For documentation, hostility evidence." Rita replied within minutes. "Received, logging it now. This helps more than you know." Marilyn set the phone aside, the condo returning to its quiet equilibrium. The harshness of Chloe's voice didn't linger. What lingered was something else, her husband's warning from the letter. A single line had echoed through her mind ever since she read it. "Be wary when the ones who shut you out begin to panic. Their fear will arrive louder than their love ever did." That fear was growing now. She felt it in the voicemail. She felt it in Andrew's restless knocking. She felt it in the way Emma had clung to her last weekend. Later that night, as the sun slipped below the tree line, Marilyn received a text from Emma, just a small heart emoji. No explanation, no questions, but the meaning was clear. Something wasn't right. Marilyn replied with a gentle check-in, but no response came. Hours passed before another message appeared, not from Emma, but from Rita. "Call me when you can. Chloe's posts are disappearing." Marilyn browsed briefly. Chloe's formerly active accounts were suddenly sparse, photos gone, captions deleted, sponsor tags removed. A few comments speculated about contract issues, others noted that her partnerships were under review. The facade was cracking. But Marilyn's concern wasn't for Chloe's image. It was for the small girl caught in the crossfire. The next evening confirmed her worry. Emma called, her voice hushed barely above a whisper. "Grandma, Mom's yelling again, Dad's trying to calm her down, but..." A tremble filled the silence on the line. "Can I stay with you just for a little while?" Marilyn's heart tightened. "Of course, sweetheart, whenever you want." A pause, then a shaky breath. "I want to come tomorrow." They made the plan quietly. After the call ended, Marilyn sat at her kitchen table, the blue folder still resting near the lamp. She opened the drawer below it and retrieved another envelope, one she hadn't read in years. Inside was a letter her husband had written specifically for Emma, sealed for "when the world starts feeling too loud," as he had phrased it. When Emma arrived the next afternoon, eyes tired, voice small, Marilyn led her to the sofa, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and opened the letter. Her husband's handwriting flowed across the page in familiar strokes. "Guard the things that guard you. Kindness, curiosity, the people who listen when others talk over you. You are never alone, little Finch, not while love is still speaking in your direction." Emma rested her head on Marilyn's shoulder, absorbing every word with the seriousness only children in turmoil possess. That night, while Marilyn brewed tea and Emma colored quietly at the table, her phone buzzed again. A notification from a local parenting forum. Discussion thread locked due to defamatory claims. User suspended. Chloe's username flashed at the top. Another buzz. Sponsor partnership with at-home Nest canceled due to conduct violation. And another. Brand ambassador role terminated for breach of professionalism. Chloe wasn't just losing the room, she was losing the image she had built her identity around. But Marilyn felt no triumph. Only anticipation. Because people who rely on control do not break quietly. And as the condo settled into evening calm, she sensed the next move wouldn't come through voicemail or social media. It would come in person. And this time, the knock at her door wouldn't be hesitant. The morning after Emma arrived with her small suitcase and quiet resolve, Marilyn drove to Rita's office with a steadiness that felt newly earned. The voicemail, the deleted posts, the unraveling facade, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the child asleep in her guest room and the legacy Marilyn no longer intended to leave vulnerable to the whims of people who mistook cruelty for control. Rita ushered her in without preamble. Files were already arranged on the table, color tabs marking the final steps. "No wiggle room," Marilyn said before she even sat down. Her voice was low, calm, absolute. "No second chances." Rita nodded once, an acknowledgement of both the decision and everything that led to it. "Then we'll finalize the grant language today." They worked for over an hour, shaping a fund in Emma's name that would follow her well beyond inheritance, structured for education first, housing next, and long-term health access. It wasn't simply money, it was protection, stability, a map for the life Marilyn wanted her granddaughter to walk into without fear of interference from the adults who had failed to offer it. When the last clause was confirmed, Rita slid the official document forward. "This ensures the trust remains untouched," she said. "Only Emma and no one listed as guardian or parent will ever control it." Marilyn initialed each page with that same steady, unflinching hand. "And Andrew?" she asked quietly. Rita opened a new folder, thicker, heavier. "Removed entirely," she said. "From executor responsibilities, from property claims, from residual assets, it's irrevocable now." For a moment, Marilyn looked at the line where her son's name once appeared, cleanly struck from the record, as though the estate itself had decided it no longer recognized him. She didn't feel relief or vindication. She felt something quieter, the closing of a door she once waited years to see open. Rita continued. "His attorney reached out again. They know a challenge would activate forfeiture, so they're trying a different angle, claiming procedural oversight in the updated filings." Marilyn exhaled, unsurprised. "And Chloe?" Rita lifted a final page, her mouth tightening. Her lawyer attempted to challenge on her behalf, but the record of hostility, voicemails, social posts, attempted access to restricted accounts voids any standing. The court dismissed it without scheduling a hearing. Marilyn sat back, absorbing the quiet truth of it. The fight was ending not with a dramatic confrontation but with an accumulation of choices, each documented, each undeniable. When she left the office, late afternoon light cast long shadows across the sidewalk. She drove home through the rust-colored neighborhoods of early spring, feeling for the first time in months something like peace rising through the cracks. At home, she found Emma sitting at the dining table coloring another lake house scene, this one brighter, windows filled with yellow light. Marilyn touched her shoulder gently. "Can I read you something?" she asked. Emma nodded, eyes softening. Marilyn retrieved the last letter she had written that week, addressed, sealed, intended for a future moment when Emma would be old enough to understand the cost and reward of choosing love over obligation. "Blood built the house, but love made it a home. And love, my darling, is what I choose to leave you, not duty, not guilt, not the weight of anyone else's choices." When she finished reading, Emma leaned against her, small and steady, and Marilyn felt the moment settle into her bones like closure. Days later, while folding laundry, Marilyn received a link from a neighbor. A local columnist had published a human interest story titled, "The Woman Who Quietly Took Her Family Back." The article was sympathetic, factual, careful with details, but unmistakably powerful. It spoke of boundaries redrawn, a legacy redirected, dignity reclaimed. Marilyn read it once, then set her phone down, letting the words fade into the quiet. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. But the piece didn't linger untouched. Because as dusk fell, headlights swept across her window, slow, deliberate, stopping just short of her walkway. The engine idled. No one stepped out. No one knocked. And as the lights held steady in the dark, Marilyn realized this wasn't curiosity. It was the beginning of someone deciding they had nothing left to lose. At dawn, before the sun fully crested the ridge, Marilyn stepped onto the lakehouse porch and let the early fog swallow her. The mist drifted low across the water, softening the world into pale gray shapes. Pines stood like quiet sentinels along the shoreline, their reflections trembling in the stillness. The air held a damp chill, but Marilyn welcomed it. Peace always arrived here first, long before conversation or memory had a chance to interfere. She walked the perimeter of the property slowly, boots pressing into the dew-soaked grass. Each path carried a different echo, her husband sanding the railing on a warm July afternoon, Emma chasing fireflies near the dock, the thrum of family before boundaries had been weaponized. The lake house hadn't changed, only the people around it had. Back inside, the quiet felt heavier, more deliberate. She crossed to the bedroom closet and unlocked the safe she had avoided opening since the last trust meeting. Inside, neatly stacked and tied with faded ribbon, were her husband's remaining letters, the ones she'd saved for when the hardest storms had passed. She carried them to the kitchen table and unfolded each with care. His words flowed across the pages with the steadiness she remembered, reflections on their early years, gratitude for the battles they had weathered, the hopes he feared might never be spoken aloud. Some lines made her smile softly, others tightened her throat. One page, written in uneven strokes near the end, asked her to trust the quieter future, a phrase she hadn't understood until now. By the time she reached the last letter, the fog outside had begun lifting, sunlight threading through the windows in pale gold stripes. A knock sounded, not sharp, not frantic, just a friendly tap. Rita stepped in a moment later, holding a bag from the bakery downtown. The scent of butter and warm sugar filled the kitchen as she set it on the counter. "They're quiet now, huh?" she said, shrugging off her coat. Her tone was light, but an undercurrent of relief threaded through it. No calls, no threats, no midnight emails from their attorney. Marilyn poured coffee for them both. Funny how that works when you take away the inheritance. Rita laughed softly, a sound edged with vindication she didn't bother to hide. People show their real selves when the safety net disappears. Marilyn didn't disagree. Silence from Andrew and Chloe wasn't reconciliation, it was retreat, and retreat often said more than confrontation ever could. They talked for a few minutes about the grant fund, the columnist's article, the legal finalizations still in motion. But beneath the practical conversation was a shared understanding. The storm had broken, and what remained now was rebuilding on her terms. A car door shut outside. Marilyn glanced through the window and saw Emma stepping out, sketchpad tucked under her arm, hair pulled into a loose morning braid. She walked up the path with a brightness that hadn't been there in months. When she reached the porch, she paused. "Grandma," she called quietly, "can I stay through the summer, maybe longer?" The question hung in the warm air, tender and hopeful. Marilyn felt something unclench inside her. Emma wasn't asking for escape this time, she was asking for belonging. She opened the drawer beside the table and withdrew a small brass key, the lake house spare, polished by years of use. She placed it into Emma's palm, folding her fingers gently around it. "This place is yours now," Marilyn said. "You just don't know it yet." Emma looked down at the key, then up at her grandmother with wide, wondering eyes. For a long moment, the lake house held its breath, walls, water, history, waiting for whatever came next. But before the stillness could settle, Marilyn's phone vibrated on the table. A single notification flashed across the screen. From Rita. "Urgent, call me immediately." And the peace Marilyn thought she had finally reached shifted, just slightly, like a ripple on the otherwise calm surface of the lake. The gallery smelled faintly of turpentine and new canvas, its high windows casting long beams of afternoon light across polished concrete floors. It was the kind of place where voices instinctively softened, where every frame on the wall asked visitors to stand still long enough to feel something. Marilyn and Emma stepped inside together. The small crowd milling around the student exhibit parted almost naturally for them, though neither seemed to notice. Emma held her sketchbook against her chest, thumb brushing the edge nervously. Marilyn rested a hand on her back, guiding her gently through the room. Then they reached it. Emma's painting. Porch light. A soft-rendered scene of the lake house porch at dusk, painted in strokes both delicate and determined. The railing dipped into shadows, warm yellow spilled from a single lamp mounted beside the door. The steps were worn, the light imperfect, but the feeling open, welcoming, drawn with unmistakable tenderness. Beneath the frame, a card displayed her artist's note in careful handwriting. "Inspired by my grandmother's lake house. A place that makes the dark feel less lonely." People lingered there longer than at the other pieces, parents, students, a couple holding hands. Some smiled gently at the idea of a porch light representing safety, others nodded with a quiet understanding of what a home could mean when the world outside grew sharp. Marilyn stood beside her granddaughter, heart swelling in a way she hadn't felt since her husband's steady presence had filled these kinds of moments. She didn't cry, she didn't need to. The painting itself felt like every unspoken thank you Emma had never known how to say. A shift of movement near the entrance caught Marilyn's eye. "Andrew." He stepped into the gallery alone, shoulders tense, suit slightly wrinkled, as though he'd come straight from a day he hadn't been prepared for. He scanned the room quickly, then found them. For a moment he froze. There was something hollow in his expression, recognition mixed with consequence. He didn't move closer, didn't raise a hand, he simply watched from across the room, positioned between hesitation and regret. Emma saw him too, her small hand tightened instinctively around Marilyn's. Marilyn didn't flinch. She rested her arm around Emma's shoulders, grounding her with a steady warmth that spoke louder than any confrontation could. The child leaned into her, choosing consciously or not the space work. She felt safe. Andrew lingered a moment longer, then stepped back, disappearing into the flow of the gallery without approaching. No apology, no explanation, only distance, the kind he had authored himself. When the exhibit ended and the lights dimmed, Marilyn drove Emma home beneath a sky washed in muted pink. She felt the weight of the day settle, not as sadness but as confirmation of what had already been rewritten. 2 mornings later, an envelope arrived by certified mail. Trust completion documents finalized. Marilyn opened the packet at the kitchen table, the same place where her husband's letters had once been spread. The language was crisp, the numbers secure, the signatures all accounted for. Every asset was now protected. Every clause airtight. Every intention honored. Emma's future no longer lived in the shadows of anyone else's decisions. Later that week, Marilyn returned to the lake house alone for one final walkthrough before transferring ownership into Emma's name. The water rippled softly against the dock posts, reflecting a sky streaked with the pale gold of late afternoon. She wandered through the rooms slowly, touching the banister her husband once sanded, pausing beside the porch where Emma's laughter once echoed, running a hand over the kitchen table worn smooth by years of meals and mended arguments. This house had held decades. It had held endings and beginnings, grief and healing. And now it was ready to hold something entirely new. She sat on the porch steps as the porch light flicked on automatically, tinting the boards in familiar amber glow. A breeze lifted the edge of her coat, carrying the faint scent of pine and lake water. She could almost hear her husband beside her, his quiet approval, his gentle humor, the way he had always believed she would know exactly when to fight and when to let go. She rose, locked the door behind her for the last time as its owner, and slipped the key into an envelope marked for Emma. As she placed it in her bag, a memory surfaced, the words Andrew had spoken with such cold certainty months ago. "You're not really part of the core family anymore." She stepped off the porch, the gravel crunching softly beneath her shoes, and felt none of the ache that once accompanied the memory, just truth, just clarity. The lake house stood behind her, steady and waiting, as she whispered the final line that would quietly rewrite the legacy she chose to keep. "He said I wasn't family anymore, but family isn't who you name, it's who shows up after the will is read."